Welcome. It is a great pleasure to introduce to you guys. I'm sure you have all come across him already. A great dear friend, and I feel a writing mentor in so many ways. Michael Sugich, aka Haroon. I've always known him as Haroon. I'll read a brief bio, and then we can kick off with some questions. If anybody has any questions in particular they want to put in the chat, please go ahead and do so, and I'll read them out. And after we've given Haroon a chance to talk, tell us a bit of his story, I'll also welcome people to unmute. So Michael Sugich is an Arab-American author and film scenarist. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Good enough. With over 40 years experience as a professional writer. A native of California, Sugich studied theater, music, and film at UCLA and the California Institute of the Arts. He worked as a professional actor in Hollywood before leaving the US in 1972 to study Islam in the UK and the Arab world. He lived for 22 years in the city of Mecca, al-Mukarramah. In 1982, King Fahd of Saudi Arabia asked him to participate in the development of Saudi Arabia's second English language channel. He produced numerous programs for Channel 2 and led the coverage of the annual pilgrimage for 2 years running. He was commissioned to write 12 documentary films on the expansion of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. He set up a film unit inside a public relations agency in 1994, and in 1998 co-founded a new public relations agency. He served as chief operating officer for 18 years and was instrumental in building the company into the largest public relations practice in the Middle East and North Africa, with 14 offices in 13 countries. Mr. Sugich is the author of Living in Mecca, Palaces of India, and Signs on the Horizons, Meetings with Men of Knowledge and Illumination, which Dr. Timothy Winter described as a classic of contemporary writing on Islam and a masterpiece. In 2016, he wrote the chapter on the Middle East for the book Public Affairs, A Global Perspective. His 2019 book, Heart's Turn, Sinners, Seekers, Saints, and the Road to Redemption, on the concept of repentance, that was published in 2019. That could be a book that you have come across more recently. It's certainly one of my favorite books to turn back to. I read it several times already. And between 2020 and 2022, he collaborated with photographer Peter Sanders on Exemplars for Our Time, a 9-book series of illustrated biographies on recent saints and sages of Islam, launched at the Bradford Literary Festival in July 2022. Mr. Sugich wrote 4 of the 9 volumes. He is also working on 2 book projects, one in the expression of spirituality in film, and another on undertaking a spiritual path in this time. He lives by the Sea of Marmara in Istanbul. Welcome. Welcome. It's absolutely such a pleasure to have you here talking with us.
Well, it's very nice to talk to you, Medina, always.
It's always lovely to touch base with you and chat, and because we always end up on the topic of writing and story and the importance of story. And I feel a lot of passion to speak about this. So I'm going to ask a question and let you, pass the mic over to you. To begin with, what started you on your writing journey? Were there any particular events or people in your life that helped you along the way?
Well, I never imagined when I was growing up that I never aspired to be a writer. It wasn't something in my, I was good at writing in school, and I got away with a lot because I was a good writer, but mostly I was involved in the theater. I started in the theater and in singing, and I was sort of a junior folk singer. Appeared on television, played guitar and sang folk songs and that sort of thing in the 50s, and then by the time I got to school, I started to become involved in I started at the age of 8 in children's theater, and then I went into youth. There was a youth theater, very robust theater program in Santa Barbara and in school, and then I went to UCLA and then the California Institute of the Arts. But then I went into the business, and I hated the business. I hated show business. It really was a shock to me because I'd spent my whole youth and growing up thinking that was the thing that I was going to do because I was talented and I knew I would be a success in one thing or another. I didn't know what exactly, but I really hated show business and the insecurity and the fact that you're out of work most of the time, and a lot of other things. And that story is actually told in part in Heart's Turn, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I had a kind of spiritual crisis. At the same time, I had a professional crisis. And I ended up entering Islam and quitting the business at exactly the same time. And then I was stuck trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, how I was going to support myself. And for a while before I got married, it didn't really matter because I could do anything and get from A to B. We all did this, your dad and Abladim, and we all did whatever we could to get from A to B, and that was enough. But when I got married and then had children, I had to get serious. And so I really started writing. I'd written a couple of things in the 1970s, but it really wasn't until about 1980 that I started making a living as a writer in Saudi Arabia, curiously enough. And I was looking for a piece by Tom Wolfe, the writer Tom Wolfe. I don't know if anyone's heard of Tom Wolfe, but he wrote The Bonfire of the Vanities and the Right Stuff. He's a brilliant writer. And he wrote he edited a book on the new journalism, which was emerging in the 1960s and 70s. And the introduction to it, he talks about himself. He'd gotten a doctorate in American studies from Yale or something, and he wanted to, he wanted to get out of academia and have a real experience of life. So he joined the New York Tribune, and they put him on the Sunday supplement page, which is the lowest rung in the journalist ladder. It's these on this. They would have like these little colored magazine inserts with gossip stories or just filler. And so he was on that, and because they didn't care about it, because they didn't really care what he did, he ended up made a career out of it. He made his career. He did articles on Las Vegas architecture and Destruction Derby and all incredible. And a lot of these things became movies. Even he wrote books out of them, and he developed his style. And the reason I'm saying that is that in Saudi Arabia, nobody cared what I did. I could do anything. So I ended up working in the radio, and I wrote 16 radio programs a month, and I ended up writing a weekly column on film. They asked me to do something on Islamic culture, and I didn't have enough background in it, but I knew a little bit about film, so I thought that would be more sustainable, and it was really popular. So then I started doing travel writing, and it was all just to make money. I just needed to make enough money that I kind of got into it that way. It was kind of and there was one really significant point. I was in Morocco. And I was staying with a friend who your dad knows as well. It was Sidi Abdullah Scott, Michael Scott, who was a very eccentric, interesting man who lived in Morocco and was born in Morocco, in fact. And his father was, some kind of, I don't know if they were aristocrats exactly, but they were, they had a mansion in Tangier. Anyway, he was teaching at the University of Fez, and he asked me to talk to his class. This was about 1980 or 81, maybe. And I somehow, I was talking to the class, and they responded very well. And I'm not really a public speaker. I don't really like doing that, but anyway, I did it. And so he asked me to come back the next day, and then the next day, and the next. And I think he was just trying to not have to do any teaching. He's just filling the time. But the students really responded, and then he said something that really crystallized something in me. He said, because I couldn't figure out what I was actually going to do to make a living, what I was, because I thought, well, I can never be in the theater and movies or anything. It's just so far away from Islam and from where I am at the moment. And he thanked me he called me a great communicator, right? Which was very complimentary, a very nice thing to say. But I said, well, that's what I've been doing all along. I've been, as through music or through performance of some sort, you're communicating with people. And I said, yeah, I can do that. I can figure out. So I ended up just being a writer and made a living as a writer for about 40 years. By the end of the 80s, I decided I wanted to write books. So I wrote a couple of books, and I'll get to that experience later on when we talk about publishing. And then I was asked to write film. Stuart Kington, he employed all of us, Abdulatif Salazar, your dad. We all worked on this project on the expansion of the two holy mosques, which was one of the biggest film projects coming out of England at the time. It was a huge thing. It was a cost plus, and it was an amazing experience. And I fell absolutely in love with writing for film. And if I had my choice, I don't know if that's still true, but I would have been very happy just writing film for the rest of my life. It was so pleasant. So I did that for several years, and then I was based in Bristol, and two of my kids were there, and my family was split up. So when that project ended, I went back to Saudi and didn't really know what to do. I was at loose ends, and then the public relations industry came in. There was no such thing as public relations in Saudi Arabia. Nobody knew what it was. It was like picking somebody up at the airport or something. And then advertising agencies started to do it. And then two big conglomerate companies set up legitimate public relations agencies, and they didn't really know what they were doing. But I needed a job. I needed to make some money. So I knew the CEO of one of these companies, and I pitched, I said, look, I can write film for you. And that didn't really pan out, but I ended up in that business. And so for the next 20 years, well, it was more than 20 years, 20 some years, I was in that business. And of course, it wasn't writing per se, but I wrote every day. I wrote press releases. I wrote business proposals. I wrote sometimes very complicated things, which had to do with finance or technology or all these kinds of things. So it wasn't exactly what I would have chosen to do, but I made a living at it for about 22 years, and I also built the company. So that was kind of an interesting challenge. And then finally, when I was really at the end of that, I was coming to the end of that phase, I just decided I have to write something. I have to use whatever skills I've been using for clients and write something that's meaningful. So my daughter was taking a course in Parsons, Paris in the summer, like a summer course. So I went with her, and I wrote. Well, she would go off to her classes, and that's when I wrote Signs on the Horizons, and I wrote it in about 2 weeks, and it was just something I felt like I needed to do, and I did it for my children, basically. So that's briefly, I guess, how I got into it. And I would say the best way to write is to write for other people, and and try to get paid for it as well if you can. Make it into, so it's not just a hobby, it's something. I have a caveat to that, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you. That's a brilliant story arc, and you managed to hold that whole thing together, which shows it's testament to your storytelling abilities, that you can get from the beginning all the way through all the travails and the ups and downs.
Well, I glossed over all the travails. You didn't hear half of them. Yeah.
But it's wonderful to see. I'm glad you're very honest, and this is one thing I really appreciate about the way that your voice is, that it's very, very honest. And to be able to share with us your the many feathers that you've had in your hat as a writer. And I think many writers will find this very useful knowledge and heartening to know that not everybody just does an MFA, writes a novel, and then that's it. Their whole writing career is it's laid out for them for the rest of their life. It may be that you do marketing or advertising or film or radio, or it could be blogging. It could be many of these things, and it may be a novel as well. But I think for me, I always had it very much built up in my mind that, to be a writer, you kind of had to choose one channel. And it's wonderful to see an example of someone who's had a life's work of multiple channels and really succeeding in many of them. And I think, mashallah, tabarakallah, that's testament to your skill and also your flexibility in being able to adapt to the situation at hand. Like you said, that, situations didn't even exist at the time. Right, let's do it. Let's make it happen. And it's we're now in quite an interesting time as well, because now podcasting is blowing up, and with digital media, things are evolving, and self-publishing. We'll come to all of that. And I'm very keen to know what you have to say about all these things. I want to go back a moment to this moment of working in Hollywood. You mentioned you had a spiritual crisis at the same time as you had a professional crisis, which is, again, something that probably many people will resonate with. As I was writing up these questions to send you, I realized that Hollywood, the word Holly is from the word holy. Their etymology.
Yeah, right. It's not very holy.
How ironic
cow.
To be in a holy cow, right? So Hollywood is like the antithesis of holiness in some ways, but perhaps not at the same time, because of that contrast, perhaps makes things more clear. So can you talk us a little bit through what you described as this spiritual crisis and how it related to your acting and your writing?
Well, it wasn't really related and directly related. I mean, first of all, this was in the 60s, right? In the 60s, there was a kind of I think they called it the age of Aquarius. It was like hair, and there was a lot. People were experimenting with psychotropic drugs, and actually, I think one of the things I tried to make clear in Heart's Turn is that the experimentation with drugs for our generation was one of kind of self-discovery. People used drugs, and then of course you either find out that you either get addicted to something, or you find out that it has limits, and you can't really, it doesn't solve your problems. But so there was that, and people were experimenting with new religions, and so it was all fascinating. And I actually, I don't want to get too much into that, because I described it as well as I possibly can in Heart's Turn. There's a section that talks about that, and where there's an intersection is basically that as an actor, I understood the value of repetition, and I'd become very not disillusioned. I was completely disillusioned with the business, with show business, which I found repellent, really. But also the theater, I became conflicted, because all the great roles, you have to invoke really terrible things, jealousy and hatred and rage and all these things. And I started to think, this can't be good for you. You can't. You're dredging up all this. I mean, actors will justify it by saying, you can inhabit these characters without suffering their consequences. But I started to feel that, it's not healthy to do that. But that was just a side thing. But what I did understand was the power of repetition. And when I was exposed to the idea of dhikr, I mean, I didn't know what it was, but this idea that you repeat certain phrases or words over and over and over again, and you do it and it sinks in. I understood this completely because actors have that experience, especially if you're in a role. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens, it's like really intoxicating, because you become the character. So you're in rehearsal and you're struggling, and the director says, no, 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 you have to try this. And you just don't have it. And then one day you walk in and it's like it comes into you and you become the character and you look the same. You're making the same actions, but everyone says, yeah, that's it. And it's it. It's something. So I understood that, and I thought, that's where I want to be. I want to be doing that, but not playing Iago or Macbeth, but assuming the character of something transcendent, something that's beautiful, right? So I understood that. That's really the intersection of that, and. It took me about a year. I was very interested in Sufism because I was never interested in all these other religions, in Buddhism or Hinduism or anything. I did yoga, but everybody did yoga at that time, it wasn't a spiritual thing. But I read some books on Sufism which were probably not that authentic. But they were very attractive at the time. And then I went and I became kind of obsessed with Sufism. And I described this in kind of painful detail in Heart's Turn. So I don't want to have to, everyone who wants to find out the rest of that particular story can read the book. But that's what led me to Islam. So I went straight from being an actor to being a Muslim with not that much in between. I mean, I kind of looked around other religions because I got involved with a kind of a fake Sufi group that basically equated all the religions as the same thing. So there was Christianity and Hinduism. So I looked around and I lost interest in it. And then when I met your dad and other people in Berkeley the first time, I said I was knocked out because I was looking for a way to pray that just made sense. And I saw the congregational prayer for the first time, and I said, that's it. And the wird as well, which had a huge impact on me. It was beautiful. Still does. Yeah.
Yeah,
50 years
mashallah.
later.
50 years, subhanallah.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And I wonder what transformation that must have had on you, and it can have on everybody, because then people might come into this at any point in their life. I've been thinking a lot recently about and reading about the impact of language, and particularly kind of rhythmic language and song and group song on healing trauma. And there is actually a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of studies on how singing in a circle, for example, will synchronize people's hearts.
Oh yeah.
And it can actually rewire the brain to really heal from a lot of damage, which is we know this because if you have the experience of it, you feel it already.
Yeah.
So
It has to be. I mean, the other side of that is that it has to be presided over by someone who knows what they're doing. Because you see a lot of really extreme people going off the deep end and that sort of thing. So there's a balance. And one of the things that I think we didn't really understand at the very beginning is how important the Sharia is. and how you have to be really, really, really grounded in these basic, in Aqidah, in Sharia, and understanding who Allah is and what our place is. People get very wrapped up in all these things, you know. Most commonly now, people are obsessed with finding a sheikh, you know, and they're looking all over the place and everything. And I think that's something that needs to be, people need to understand the process more. But anyway, that's another story. That's
so many stories that are kind of just
yeah.
being tantalizingly alluded to here. So mashallah, there's many more stories that are to your pen. Speaking of stories, what was it like for you to come into contact with the literary traditions of Islam, especially having connected with literary traditions in English and through theatre and things like this? And you mentioned Shakespeare. What was it like for you to experience, for example, Rumi's poetry for the first time? And also, how do you feel that they can influence or interweave with our own literary output, like Muslims in our times, in English or in any other language?
Well, I think it was the writing of Sufis that has been the primary influence on my own writing. I mean, I'm influenced by Evelyn Waugh is a big influence on my writing, and Tom Wolfe, another one, also to a certain extent Graham Greene. So there are writers that have influenced me, but more than anything, it's the writing of the great Sufi writings, of course, in translation, because my Arabic is appalling, you know, so I can't claim that I was inspired by the Arabic, but some of the translations. And for example, this wonderful translation of a book that's titled The Sufis of Andalusia, which I'm sure you've read. I read that very early on and was very influenced by that, because of one of the things that characterizes all of these people. They're incredibly humble. Everyone, every single one of these writers, even including Ibn Arabi, who's unfortunately referred to far by so many people who don't understand any of what he's actually writing. There's this great humility, so that they're always deferring to their predecessors. They never make claims, and they're scrupulous in their honesty about where they are at any given time. If they know something, then they can say it, but if they don't know something, they don't talk about it. And so there's this wonderful quality, and also the Quran. One of the things that we were doing a play called The Screens by Jean Genet, which was about the Algerian War, and the director distributed passages from the Quran that was translated, the Arbery Quran translation. And Arbery made a conscious attempt to kind of capture the rhythm of the verse. I'm not sure how accurate the translation was, but what struck me, I remember taking this mimeograph sheet and reading it as I was walking out of the rehearsal hall, and stopping dead in my tracks, saying, this is the way people think. We think in waves and fragments, and it's shifting. And, you know, there's just something, then that really, I think, has influenced me as well. That, you know, the kind of fragmentary nature of that kind of expression. And also, if you read the Tabakat literature, you know, of the great shuyukh, you know, the biographical literature, it's very fragmentary. It's just it's something here. It's unapologetic. It doesn't have to be long and endlessly. It's just these very tight pieces, you know. So I was influenced by that a lot, I have to say.
That's very interesting. You mentioned the tabaqat genre because I have also, something I've also noticed. There's also those kinds of genres of collections of Sufi stories, and Rumi does it, and various people have done it, and they've collected together just tales. They're just short tales. They're not really.
Yeah,
It's quite different from the Western canon, isn't it? Because it's not like
yeah,
deep characterization. It's just a
yes,
little string of events, and here's a kind of wisdom that kind of pops out of it, and like a
yeah,
little burst of
yeah,
light that comes from it, and then you move on. It's
right.
it's interesting. I wonder if that's something that we can translate into. I mean, it has been
I,
translated into English, but what if we were to write in that format already?
think it's worth the try. I mean, we need to, first of all, we need more writers. It's very, very, very important because if we don't have storytellers, we're going to lose the audience. I mean, I was sitting with Sheikh Mohammed Jilani not too long ago, and he said people don't read the ulama anymore. They don't listen to ulama. They don't respond. I mean, they might if you're very religious or if you're feeling very religious, but they don't. It's not a go-to source of knowledge anymore. People don't pick up hefty tomes of, but they will learn through stories. Because you bring a piece of wisdom to life. You actually can take something and I think we need that very much because we're all facing a deluge of storytelling on media, on social media, on these streaming platforms. I mean, literally a tsunami of stories, and they're very, very, very dark. I mean, we have a real problem now, and I think as Muslims we have to take it very seriously and find alternatives for people that are not parochial. In other words, they're not just religious tales. This is it's one of the things I'm with this film book I'm working on. I'm getting very deeply into what the cinema is, what it is now, what it started as, what it's become, and what the potential is for Muslim writers and filmmakers. And anyone who knows about film will know that the most important aspect of the film is the screenplay, is the writing. It's before anything else. And so we need people to do this and to understand how to do it.
Thank you for mentioning film also again, because I feel like this is a very interesting way of embracing contemporary scene, like recognizing that this is the way that people absorb stories now is quite often through film and through very short form films as well. Like now with, I don't know how familiar you are with TikTok and Instagram Reels and so on, but there's sort of almost that people are being told that the ideal length of a video is 20 seconds or less, and so in that it's like micro stories, which in a way is not a million miles away from these stories that we were just mentioning. Like a short story, if you could squeeze it right in, it's got a kind of a punch to it, learn the meaning, and then if that's the way that people are absorbing those stories, then it's like we do have to sort of adapt, I guess, and diversify the media and genres and not be stuck in this kind of, here's the religious literary canon and here's everything else. It's like,
right. Well, I think one of the mistakes that I think Muslims, creative people, have made as Muslims is that they parochialize the medium. In other words, they say, well, I mean, the classic thing is if you want to make a Muslim movie, it's going to be about some glorious episode in Islamic history, or worst of all, the story of the Prophet, ﷺ, which is incredibly problematic and never works really because it's offensive to many people and so on. And in fact, you can tell stories that are deeply spiritual in a way, that have all the qualities of that we extol and that the prophet extols, without being even Islamic. You could make a movie without anything. And I'll give you one of the artists that I'm hoping and planning to interview is Majid Majidi, who is the Iranian, you must know him, the Iranian filmmaker. He understands the sacred. He understands how to express that in this very amazing way, because people are just kind. There's rahma, through, it's just shimmering through his films. And that's Islamic. You don't have to call it Islamic. It's human, but it's what we extol as something beautiful. And if you take the films of Akira Kurosawa, for example, Kurosawa's films, I mean, he may have characterized himself as an atheist for all I know. I'm looking into it, but his films, you could exchange the names and the places and redo those films and call the people Muslim names and put them in, a Central Asian village or something, and they would be completely naturally Muslim fables, because they talk about they represent chivalry and mercy, and there's a new film that I think is it's a remake of Kurosawa's great film Ikuru, which is one of his greatest films. And the film that's just been made is called Living. It's with Bill Nighy, the actor, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's really, and it's probably the best remake of any film I've ever seen. And again, it's a story that Muslims need to have in their consciousness, because it's about a man who's confronted with death. Like, what do you do with your life? You're going to die, and what do you do? And it's just that simple thing. Well, this is an existential problem that we all have as Muslims, and you don't have to parochialize it. It's just something. I just read the other night, yesterday we were reading from the book on death, death and the remembrance of death by Al-Ghazali. And one of the things I didn't read was Al-Ghazali said, he cites a hadith that you get a huge reward if you think of death 20 times a day. So I mean, these are existent. This is not an Islamic. Islam is for everybody. So we have to, anyway. I can go on like that for 20 minutes, but I'll leave it at that.
It is wonderful to hear you wax lyrical about it. I often think the same thing about, my dad has often said this about songs as well as songwriting, that a song doesn't have to be overtly Islamic. It doesn't necessarily have to have Arabic words, because and it even may make it more accessible to somebody who is maybe has a bit of a problem with religion in general, and help kind of cross boundaries. Not there's anything wrong with a song that is made of Arabic. There's nothing wrong with that, but he's talking specifically from his experience as an English songwriter, that he shouldn't necessarily feel constrained to make a song that expresses his spirituality using Arabic words, when he should be able to express it using his own language and in whatever.
Absolutely. And the work that you do with the Diwan is a very good example. It's very beautiful. It doesn't violate any of the what the aesthetics of Islam at all. It speaks to an audience much more directly than some of the naghmas that we do. I mean, which we love doing, but still, your interpretations of some of the Diwan are really beautiful. I mean, I was just talking to Kareem Laham, and we both think you should record the whole Diwan.
Wow. Well, inshallah, one day, maybe
You
make
should
dua
do
for
it.
me. Maybe that will happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, before we go off and talking about me, this is about you. Um,
I
I
was hoping to divert your attention away from me.
well,
Yeah.
we can talk more generally as well about what you think in terms of the role of imagination and how I like the fact that we're already talking about kind of bending the rules a little bit and thinking outside of the box and thinking of writing in terms of ourselves as writers who are Muslim, but the genres that we want to write in and the material that we want to write could take all kinds of forms. And I think that just to think that way requires imagination. And
Yeah.
feels like our last interview was with Dr. Ali Hussein, who's written a book, A Nostalgic Remembrance, which I think you would love. And he delves into the topic of the Alam al-Khayal and some things that Ibn Arabi has to say about this with contemporary and non-Muslim writers like Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes. And he shows that imagination is a sort of a spiritual realm, actually, and whether or not the output seems spiritual, it's another matter, because that relates to the artist and how they interpret things and how they receive that inspiration. But that when a person decides to open themselves up to that kind of creative inspiration, they are accessing a kind of you could say a higher realm or something like that. How do you feel about that? What's your experience with just allowing yourself to be completely imaginative?
Well, it's a very sort of subtle subject or question to deal with, because on the one hand, there's the gross imagination, there's the fantasizing, which is something different than the creative imagination of the higher self. But I think we're all vehicles. We're all used by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. I mean, one of what we seek to experience is that the reality of la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that we have no power, and that language comes from Allah. So in a way, there is that creative thing, and anyone will tell you, when you're into it, I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, you get into what I would call a zone, and that's when it really is enjoyable. You do all the junk, put it all down, and then suddenly things just start, struggle with, and things start happening. And this happens to everybody, and it's all from, everything is from Allah. Well, khayru wa sharu bi masha'atillah. There's the good and evil, but it depends on which side of the spectrum are you on. Are you invoking evil? Are you invoking good? Are you encouraging and so as a Muslim writer, someone, if you're doing a job of work, then you fiddle with language, and you say, you try to be as expert as possible. So there's a skill to it and a talent as well. But as a Muslim writer, if you're writing something for Muslims, then you have to have fear of Allah, really, and be very, very sincere, and really ask Allah to help you express what you say correctly, and not supersede your limits. In other words, writing is a powerful tool, and when you get published and people can overestimate who you are, you can become this figure, because in print, it's the same thing in movies. People fantasize. I mean, it's one of the things that disillusioned me about movies was I met some of the people that I, idolized as a little kid, and they weren't the way, weren't the people that I thought they were, So, this happens. But I saw an interview with Bob Dylan, for example, and someone asked him, how did you write all those songs? He said, I don't know. They just came to me. He was like a vehicle, and we're all, and this is why you can't really teach writing. You can teach techniques and things, but either you can write or you can't. Like, you can write, Medina. Not everybody can do it. It's a talent, And I think the talent is where, you know, this is where you connect with the imagination, and things come to you, you know, like that. And then a genius is someone, you know, that's related to the word jinn, which is the unseen, where you're connected to something in the unseen that feeds you things. And it's not necessarily, and I've been around some people who are geniuses, and it's not a pretty sight, really, because they're taken over by this thing to a point where it can be self-destructive. You know, it's just, that's all that there is just this thing that they have to do. We don't seek something like that, but I think imagination, it's something, it really depends on your state of mind. And if you're writing as a Muslim, the best preparation for that is dhikrullah and ibadah, because then the heart is open and things come to you. You know, this is what happens. Like you when you have firasa, when you have insight, suddenly if you're doing dhikr, you just see something. And my teacher, Sayyid Omar Abdullah, he had this very strong firasa. He could see things. And I asked him about it once. He said, I don't know, it just comes to me. You know, it isn't like he has, you know, some sort of thing. No, it's the heart is pure and clean and things come to you. And as a writer, you know, you want the heart to be clear, and, you know, but on the other hand, I had a friend who was a really good songwriter, but, you know, who was not a Muslim or anything, but he was a very good songwriter. And I asked him how he did that, because I could never figure out how you could write a song. I just couldn't do it. And he said, oh, you have to feel terrible, you know. That was his way of doing it. And on the dark side of the spectrum, that's how people do a lot of creative work. But that's coming out of kind of darkness and unhappiness and so on. So you can have a dark imagination, and I think that's where film and music and a lot of the creative expressions, they've gone very dark and nihilistic and everything. So you can have an imagination that's fed by that as well. So I think it depends on the heart, what the state of the heart. And if you're talking about Islam, the one thing I try to do, because I don't write imaginal story. I don't think I could write fiction. I've thought about writing fiction, but I'm not sure I could do it. You know, somehow I don't think that way. But when it comes to writing, I'm very scared when I write that I'm not embellishing. You know, that you want to capture the moment of something that you remember or that you've witnessed or something, but you don't, and you want to heighten it, but you don't want to lie about it or make it up, because that's a temptation. It's like, it would be much better if it was this way, or but you have to have fear of Allah for something like that.
MashaAllah, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I would disagree with is I think that you don't have to just be born as a writer, and there are ways that you can learn, but inshallah, poco a poco, everything is about a process of trying to develop craft. And I think also what we want to do with the Writer Salon is to help people to establish a meaningful relationship with writing, so that it's really about the meaning. And then once voice is content.
Yeah, I mean, I have to stress. I'll tell you a story from myself. Before when we started making a living as a writer, I had this idea that I wanted to work in metal work. I wanted to be a metal worker, right? I had this thing, you know. I like metal work, and so I apprenticed myself to like a silversmith who was in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and actually in Berkeley or Oakland or something. And he was a short little guy who'd come out of the Navy and set up this practice, and he was doing really well. And he took me in, and I worked for about a month. I went every day and struggled with it and everything. And one day he came up, he put his hands on his hips, and he said, "You're real smart." And I said, "Okay, what?" "You're real smart." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm trying to learn metalworking." He said, "You're never going to learn metalworking." He said, "You don't have it. You can't do it." And he was right. I have no manual dexterity. I just can't do it. And some people, they try to write and they can't write. They're not. It's boring. And I've seen this. I had a friend who was an heir to an oil fortune. I mean, he was very wealthy, but he lived very simply. And he ultimately he he traveled all over the world. He dated Svetlana Stalin, I mean, this is a very strange and interesting guy. He was a very nice guy. And he always talked about being a writer, and he knew all these. He knew Marshall McLuhan, and he knew, he had money, he traveled and everything. And he was always talking about being a writer, but I never saw anything he wrote. And finally, he gave me a manuscript. He said, "This is my book that I finished." And he said, "I want you to read it." And I read it, and it was awful. It was just I mean, it was literate, but it was just not. And he was older, he wasn't young, because he didn't have to write. He made his money off of a trust fund. He was living on a trust fund. He had a house in Malibu that he rented out and lived in a surfer's flat. He was a really sweet guy, but he was not a very very good writer. And some people, they just don't have it, and it's better for them. I mean, if there are a lot of bad writers who make a good living, at it. So you could go ahead and be a writer, and if you find something that's that works, that God bless, and enjoy. But I think really it isn't something you can really teach. You can't really teach writing. I think you can teach techniques, and then if the person has talent, they'll develop that. But in all these creative occupations, I think you have to be realistic. Can you make a living as a writer? Or do you have talent? Rather than to try to do something that you're not really equipped to do. It is a gift. You have it, and it's recognizable. When as soon as I read your poetry, I knew you had something special. You had a talent. But I've read a lot of other poetry that people have shown me, and it's not very good. It's not very good,
Well,
and
it
you have
sounds like
to.
there's a talent in everybody that can be nurtured, or at least people who
Yeah,
have a reason to want to write. I mean, as you say, your
yeah,
friend maybe didn't
absolutely.
have the fire in him. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, you can write. There's all kinds of writing too. There's business writing. I mean, the worst writing, in my opinion, the lowest level of writing is academic writing. It's just horrible, horrible writing.
You probably have a few
Yeah.
people agreeing in the audience.
Yeah.
Not
No,
that
I'm
it's
just
easy
no.
to do. It's hard to do, but it's
It's hard,
right.
but because they make you kill the writing. There's no. It's dead. It's like an artifact or something. It's just that in my opinion, it
You
doesn't
guys
mean
are
that.
welcome to chip in the chat, and
Yeah.
welcome all opinions on this
Yeah,
matter.
everybody, yeah,
The hot
bring it
topics.
on. Bring it on. I don't mind. That's just my opinion. But but there are there is a lot of, there are many kinds of writing, and some writing, like for example, journalism writing, it's very interesting, but it's flat. It has to be very flat,
Right. It
and
has to have no
so
emotion.
and again, what I'm saying is you have a talent for certain kinds of things. If you're not a good novel, if you don't have a talent for being a novelist, don't do it. Write something else. I mean, it's like me. I don't think I do very well as a novelist.
Right. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
kind of have a natural inclination towards something, in which is going to come well for you. It's like in Spanish they say "le sale bien,"
yeah,
like it comes out of you well,
yeah,
and then you just
yeah,
go, yeah, I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to
yeah.
work to my
I
strengths.
mean,
Is the
but
expression.
don't you find writing is easy? You
I
find
I
it
love
easy?
I love writing. I find it easy, and I think
Yeah,
it's because I'm a very
so do
verbal,
I.
linguistic person. And when I try and do art, I have a difficult time because I'm not a very
Yeah,
physical, like visual, physical person. I can describe things in
right,
words, visual, but I'm using language. I'm not using paintbrush.
right.
We
Yeah,
have a few
absolutely.
questions.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so
Okay.
I will come back to Muhammad Ali. Assalamu alaikum. I will come back to your comment, your question above. He just responded, laugh out loud. I'm an academic trying to plunge into creative writing and trying to find conditioning and unlearn. We will be definitely doing workshops on unlearning or healing from academic writing. And Ambata also says definitely truth in what he's saying about academic writing, probably why I left it. Yeah, this has come up for us a few times, and it seems to be almost like when people think of writing, that's one of the only ways that we can think about it, is either like you say, journalism, because in a sense we're thinking of writing, there's two ways of looking at writing. Either it's writing for a kind of self-realization or some sort of for pleasure or discovering yourself or something like this, or as a job. And as a job, it's almost like never the twain shall meet. It's really hard to find that connection between, you mentioned before, like your advice is just to find somebody who'll pay you to do it and just be able to make a living with it, because it is a struggle.
Well, the other thing I would say, I mean, this is my opinion, is I think you should never write for yourself. You should always write for someone else. It could be for your husband or your children or something. You don't write. People who say they write for themselves, I'm almost certain that their work is lousy. I mean, you may say that you write for yourself, but you're actually writing for someone else. It isn't. I mean, you could then, on the other hand, you could then pander to the lowest common denominator, which a lot of writers do, and that's a whole other thing. But don't ever write for yourself. You'll enjoy it if it's effective writing. It'll be for yourself as well. I mean, you get into. I love to read my writing. I like my writing. I think it's good, and so I like to read it. And so I get a pleasure out of it. But I never write for me. Just my eyes only. I write for somebody else. And hope that it can make a difference. When I wrote Signs on the Horizons, I said to my late dear friend Shams that if it helps one person, right, it will have been worth it. And I have a friend who's from the Saudi royal family, and her mother was very, very sick. And in fact, she passed away from the illness. And she told me that every night her mother insisted that she read from my book to her. And when she told me that, I said, mission accomplished. That was it. It's just one person. If one person if you can help one person or open their heart or give them hope or whatever it is, that's worth it. And
yeah, I see what you mean. I guess it's to do with the intention and what you hope to, who you hope it's going to reach, and what you hope it's going to move in other person.
Right.
And then also collectively, I mean, I think of writing as being something that's has a great potential for healing. For me myself, it's very cathartic. Obviously, as you say, I get pleasure out of writing, and I sometimes go to writing when I feel very frustrated and angry about something, and then I automatically I have to write. I just want to write because it's going to help this situation feel easier inside myself. But then also, I have one or two more questions, and I will answer. I will share everybody's questions here. Muhammad Ali Amla says, love Signs on the Horizon truly set me on a quest of seeking. While I've stumbled many times, there's a great light in it, mashallah. And Anam says, perhaps it is about a starting point. We may find it very confronting or too aspirational to acknowledge we are writing for others when we pick up the pen. But as the story evolves, we see it truly is to serve. That's a very nice way of looking at it, to see the writing as a form of service, and then art.
It is. It can be. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing I would say. There are two ways of going about writing. If you're writing as a Muslim, right, as a Muslim, not as a worker, don't do it for money. In other words, even if you get paid, don't make that why you're doing it, because that is a very corrosive factor. You know, if you do that, I mean, we have well, I'll get into this later, but I mean, we have very niche audience. I mean, if you're going to write a book, you're not going to sell 1 million copies. It would be very unusual for anyone. So a bestseller for us is 5,000 copies, maybe 10,000 copies. That would be great. But it's just, this is a narrow audience. If you want to expand it out, then you have real moral problems, because books that sell trade on sex, crime, violence, things that people that what do they call it? You know, when something it's like an enzyme or something. It gets your blood running, and people want to be
right.
They want to be, what do they call it? There's some word for it. Anyway, some chemical.
Adrenaline?
Not adrenaline. That's not. Anyway, never mind about that. That's people are used to getting stimulated in those ways.
Dopamine.
And
Dopamine?
it's kind of like dopamine, I guess. It's just whatever. It's just it gets you all jacked up.
Yeah,
And
endorphins.
Endorphin, that's it. Endorphins. That's the word. Boy, getting old and slow. Okay, so anyway, that's what I would say is don't do it for the money. Do it, and this is something that you know, I've there's a writer that you probably know about, Fran Lebowitz. You know, have you ever seen Fran Lebowitz? She's an interesting, she's a strange character. Anyway, she's about my age, and she said something that in an interview that really struck home to me. She said, in my generation, we never thought about money. And I asked everybody, I asked, you know, your dad, none of us thought about money. Now everyone's obsessed with money, like, and I think that is an incredibly negative. From a creative standpoint, it's very negative. If what you do just for the money, and everything is monetized. I mean, of course, everybody needs money. You need to make a living and so on. But this thing of like doing something for the money, I don't, and particularly if it's something that's Islamic or that has an Islamic thing, it can be very, very dangerous. I think even, you know, in terms of your
probably a lot of people would say capitalism has a lot to do with that.
No, that's true. But capitalism, we also have to remember that Allah is the provider, no matter what capitalism is doing. You know. And okay, the sums are bigger, you know. At the turn of the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, you could live for $5 a week. You know, you could buy a lunch for 5 cents. So 50 years later, it was much more expensive, but still Allah is the provider. You know, no matter what the anyway.
Well, there's some interesting, this has actually sparked a very interesting discussion in the chat, and I want to read out a few of these to do with writing for ourselves and writing for other people. I think because we've previously had discussions about if you were a minority if you're a writer and in a room full of non-Muslims, for example, let's say you're the only Muslim in the room, and having to explain yourself to people all the time is a very exhausting kind of experience.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, just writing for yourself can be a very liberating thing, although then you maybe have to think about how to translate that to people and so on. Ambata says we can write for ourselves in the sense that there are others who think and feel and experience what we do and maybe don't know how to express those things. I think it's about making connections. I think that's a really, really good, important point. And Warren said,
but that's exactly what I'm saying is what she's saying, she's writing for somebody else. It's not that you don't write for yourself. Of course you write for yourself, but you're not the primary audience. Your audience should be somebody, could be your best friend. I don't care, but you have to connect. It's the connection that she mentioned. You connect with someone.
Yeah.
That's what's important,
Yeah. And that's why we write and share our work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would be
Yeah.
like, what's her face? I'm having a bit of a brain dead moment as well. The poet who wrote all those poems and sewed them up and just kept them in her closet. Yeah. Emily Dickinson. Warren says, I disagree in that I write for myself first and foremost, but that is to ensure authenticity. I think this is what we're talking about. And in doing so, it becomes real for others. It's extraordinary.
So he's not writing for himself. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. It's when somebody writes and they don't care if anyone else reads it. I think that's selfish.
Right.
Then and frankly, then I don't want to read their stuff. If they don't care if anyone reads it, then what are they doing it for? So that they can look at and see how beautiful I am or something. It's like narcissism. And I don't think anyone is making that claim. I think that it's just the way you look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess we're touching on how interconnected and universal most of our experiences are, despite how our specific context may appear. So if I say I write for myself, that isn't really separate to writing for others, and the same when looking the other way. Interesting food for thought. Okay, I'm going to move forward a little bit because this is a very, very interesting and important point, but there's a few other things I wanted to draw on. Going back to our idea about writing as healing, very briefly, what do you think the potential is for, let's say we all develop our stories and we get them out there, what's the potential for really changing the world tangibly?
We don't change the world. I mean, this is the activists' fantasy. Allah changes the world. What we can do is we change what's in ourselves, and then our immediate environment. You can help people. You can't even look. You have children. I have children and grandchildren. I can't really even change my children, much less the world. This idea I'm going to change the world. It's Allah. Everything is from Allah. Everything. There's a story that I heard about Sheikh Mohammed ibn Habib. He was on a bus journey, and the bus broke down. And he was with one of his companions, and the driver was outside looking at the engine, and all the passengers were milling around, waiting, and the companion got up to go and join the other passengers, and Ibn Habib said, "No, sit down." He said, "They think that this bus runs by internal combustion," and he explained in detail the process of internal combustion, which I couldn't do. He said, "No, this bus runs by the qadr of Allah. Like everything is from Allah, everything." If we think so, the change in the world is that doesn't mean that you feed people, you help, you take care of orphans. When people are in distress, you help them, you do all that, but you're not going to change the world by anything. And this is the problem now with this celebrity culture that we're in, is that someone does something, it goes viral, and they think that they're making a difference. It doesn't really change anything. It's just suddenly they're famous, and it's nice, we've been around people who are well known, and they touch people, alhamdulillah, but do they really change the world? I doubt. They change individuals, which is good enough. If someone says something that's deeply, but it's not them, they're instruments of Allah's qadr, and I think that's the way we need to look at these things, that we're not really, we do the best we can. Hamza Yusuf wrote one of the books in the series that we published recently, the Exemplars. He called me and he said, I'm just weeping writing these. And it's a beautiful thing. I don't know if you've read his book, but it's beautiful. It's one of the best things I think he's ever done. And it's just because it affected him And I think one of the good signs when you're writing something like these stories is if it gets to you. And if it gets to you, then it's going to get to the reader, you know. And
Inshallah.
yeah, so I mean, but does it change? It's nice to get letters or messages that your book has meant a lot to me, and you know, it's wonderful. But I can't, you know, it's then it's from Allah. It's not really from me, you know. I didn't do anything except put a bunch of words down, and I think that's the way we're.
I think that's very modest of you, but it's also a very good attitude, I think, to take if you are in the public eye and if people are reading your work, and
Yeah,
rather than,
alhamdulillah.
someone just quoted to me a line from Quran about describing, I wish I could quote it line by verse, but people who project, essentially it was saying people who are projecting the worst of themselves onto God and arrogating the best onto themselves, and how, you know, this, when a lot of the kind of classical Muslim writers would embark on something, they would say all the good in this is from Allah and all the bad it's from
Yeah,
me, just to kind of flip the natural inclination of the ego towards wanting to hang on to that.
yeah, I know. Well, that's the danger of celebrity, and it's one of the things that propelled me out of show business, because I was around. I had a very close friend who became very quickly very famous when he was young, and it kind of ruined his life. You know, I mean, it was suddenly he got the best tables. You know, he had people throwing themselves at him, everything, and he was just this idiot, you know, like everybody else. And it was just because he was in a movie, you know, or two. So it's
That's a shame.
that it was a shame, but it also saved me from going down the same kind of road where,
Right.
you know, because it's an illusion, and all of this kind of celebrity things. And we live in an age of that, you know, with social media, where, you know, things go viral, you know. And what does that mean? That's not a measure of anything,
Right.
you know.
It's kind of we're circling back to this issue of sincerity and authenticity in writing, and making the
Yeah,
story thing and letting it actually touch people, letting it touch your
right.
own first and foremost, and then inshallah it will move somebody's heart somewhere, and potentially we don't know where that's going to go. It's in Allah's hands. Muhammad Ali Amla said earlier, I often say we as Muslims are cultural consumers, but we require more Muslim cultural producers. And so I'm
Right.
deeply appreciative of this space. I've been grappling with writing theatre, which is contemporary, reflecting the grittiness of reality whilst keeping it kosher. Would love your insight
Right.
in how to create theatre which is halal, whilst addressing contemporary issues which may not be strictly halal. You've begun
Well,
to answer my question already.
well, I have a very good friend, Martin Askew, who actually is one of the chapters in Heart's Turn is about him. He was a gangster, an East London gangster. And Martin is a very, very talented playwright, and he wrote a play. He produced a film about his experience, and this is outrageous. He produced a film about a gangster becoming a Muslim, you know, and he got it done. You know, I mean, it's not a great film or anything, but he did it. And then he wrote a play, and I can't remember the name of it, but we went to see it and it was performed in London, not on the West End or anything, but, you know, off in a small theater. And it was amazing. It was an amazing play, and it was about someone who was a Muslim, you know, and I can't remember the whole plot, but it was extremely well done. And he's very talented, and you know, he's struggling. The problem is that if you're parochial about this, then it's hard to get seen. You know, it's hard to get someone to put money up for things. And you know, this is one of the things when you're talking about film writing and film. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of screenplays that are produced like every year, and hundreds of movies. So, for 10,000 screenplays, maybe there are 300 movies, or I don't know, maybe there are more now, I don't know. But if you look at what's produced, it's mostly horrible stuff. It's violent and it's formulaic and so on. So you have to be realistic. And I saw an interview with Billy Wilder. I don't know if you know, but Billy Wilder was the director who directed Some Like It Hot, and he's a great director. And he lived to be like nearly 100 years old. So this was when he was in his 90s. Some interviewer said, it's wonderful that you spent 65 years making movies. What a wonderful life. He said, are you kidding? He said, I've spent 5 years making movies and 60 years trying to get the money to make the movies, which is the truth about these things. And one of the nice things about being a writer of books, people put books down, but people still read, and you can make a book and it comes out, and if you do it the right way, it stays in print and it has an effect. If you want to make a movie, you've got to come up with a lot of money one way or another, and then you have to find out how you're going to distribute it. And,
Right.
and it's very tough. So if you make a movie on an Islamic subject, you're already in hot water. I mean, how are you going to do it? And anyway, we can go on and on about that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
we're opening up into many other kind of areas to discuss, which I think are very fertile discussions. We'll have to leave a few things hanging because I don't want to take up everyone's time, and I apologize for starting late. There was one very brief question I wanted to have your thoughts on. I know that this is also a huge topic. I would love to get Martin, ask you to teach actually for us, or at least talk about his experience with playwriting, because I think that's
you should.
Theatre is one of the most brilliant ways of synthesizing so many arts. You have music and direction and props and makeup and background and set and lighting. It's a really interesting kind of nexus to really bring like an immersive experience to storytelling. Very briefly, I know this is a big topic. How do you rate, or what was your experience with self-publishing?
Okay, that's what we started with. So first of all, I have to tell you, in principle, I hate publishers. I mean, I've never had a good experience with publishers, and there are reasons for it. The business has changed now. Peter and I went to Frankfurt, the book fair, a few years ago, just to check it out, and basically the whole business has completely changed because people but I've had terrible experiences with publishers, and if there's a publication that used to come out, I don't know if it still does, called the Writer's Digest in Britain, and they used to have a section of like writers' experiences with publishers, and it was all terrible. They were all complaining. One of Shams, Allah yarhamu, was very close to Sani Mehta, who was the head of Knopf. And just a few years ago, before they both passed away, Sani Mehta told Shams, he said, we only look at books that we think we can make a movie out of. Where the business has gone. And in my case, I did a book on India like 30 some years ago, and it was a really good book. I mean, I really liked doing it. We spent almost a year in India at different times, and 4 months. And we put the book was spec'd out to have 100 photographs, and anyway, we turned everything in, And this was during what was called the Rage for the Raj, you know, where you had Gandhi and the Far Pavilions and Jewel in the Crown and Passage to India. There was this spate of books. So I wrote the book to fit in with that trend. And they sat on it for a year and a half. And by the time and I said I wanted it in paperback because I wanted people to be able to carry it with them. And anyway, the publisher ignored and then the worst thing was I wrote it in a Kipling, in the style of Kipling, who has very long rhythmic sentences. And I did it on purpose. And then they put each page, they used 2 columns on each page. So the sentence goes all the way, you know, to read one sentence goes like that. And I begged the managing editor, I said, look, I'm begging you, please don't use these columns. And he said, well, we know what we're doing. We're experts and all this. And the book, you know, didn't do well. You know, it was 2 years late. They didn't give it any promotion. Publishers basically suck as far as I'm concerned. You know, I mean, really, now there may be exceptions to this. You find, and I'm excluding, you know, like our beloved, you know, Aisha and ITS and Fons Vitae. They do really credible work, but even then, they're hand-to-mouth operations. They're, you know, you don't get royalties. You know, it's a completely different thing. Now, so when I wrote Signs on the Horizons, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And I was, you know, Shams encouraged me to send it to a publisher. I said, look, they're not going to accept it. It's too unusual a book. They can't figure out where to put it on the shelves and so on. And I sent it to one publisher, and of course they said, no, thank you very much, but we're not interested, and so on. And then I stopped. And Shams's son, Nuri, who's really bright. I don't know if you know Nuri, but he's really, and he's a very gifted writer as well. He said, why don't you try self-publishing? And I said, no, that's vanity publishing. You know, we all look down on that. And Nuri said, not anymore. And I started looking into it, and I realized that more and more authors were publishing through Amazon and through Lulu. Those were the 2 things. It's fantastic. You get better royalties. You're on, I use Amazon. On Amazon, you're immediately, you know, and there have been people who have had multi-million selling books, you know, self-published books. This is not I mean, my books sell okay, but you know, they're Muslim books from, you know, a narrow audience. But there are people that write, I don't know, you know, love story romances and all kinds of other things, and they sell millions of books. And the advantage, there are lots of advantages. First of all, they're incredibly organized, and you get your royalties every month. Every month I get a transfer. And they send you your tax receipts and all this kind of thing. And they have, for those who don't know what it is, it's print on demand. So you never, there's no storage. You don't have to store books, which is, you know, can be a real problem, particularly if you're over optimistic and you print too many copies and then you sell 3,000 and you have 1,000 more copies, and they just sit in storage for year after year, and you sell one at a time because eventually sales fall off. Anyway, and so what happens is, if you have a publisher, if you don't sell in the first 6 months, they remainder the books. They have to get rid of them because they have, you know, limited storage space. So they just dump them into the market and get rid of them. And then your book is out of print. So what are you going to do? Are they going to do a second printing? No. If it doesn't fly off the shelves, and they don't help you either. They don't promote these. None of these people promote the books unless you're a celebrity or something. When I was looking for a literary agent, I went to a guy And he was really forthright. He said, "Look, this is really good what you have," but he said, I can't handle this." He said, if you brought me a book on how to make £1 million in 2 weeks, or if you brought me a book that's like a celebrity biography or something, I'd be interested. But it's too hard to sell, because they make their money from from the royalties that you make. And so anyway, so what happens is if they don't fly off the shelves, then it goes out of print, and that's it. That's the end of your book. With Amazon or the other print on demand books, you're always in print. I mean, Signs on the Horizon's been in print for 10 years and it's still available, right? The other thing is that you can change the book. You can, like, if you want, you can upload another version of the book under the same ISBN, as long as you don't change the title or something like that. So there's that advantage. Now, the disadvantages, first of all, photographic books, they haven't developed that technology well enough. So the color photograph, you can have color books, but it's not of the standard that most, like, a photographer would want. I mean, and also they're limited sizes. They keep developing now. Amazon, you can do a hardback book. Like your book is hardback. And that's nice. For me, I don't care. I prefer paperback books anyway, because I carry them around, throw them here and there, and it's all so it's limited in that way. It's also limited in the sense that I don't think libraries will accept print on demand books. I mean, maybe they do by now, but a few years ago, libraries, they would not accept, even as a gift, a print on demand book, because it had a to them, it was this kind of negative connotation that it's like, again, vanity publishing. But it's not vanity publishing.
It used to be that if you would read it once, it was pretty much done. Like, the pages would start falling out and stuff. And oh yes, she's a bookseller. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm talking about this because I think this is something we can come back to in greater depth later, because I think self-publishing for Muslims particularly is a very interesting and in some ways essential avenue, but people have to gain a lot of awareness about it, because these portals, these different, I've been investigating Ingram Sparks, and it's brilliant. It's got tons of possibilities. You can have a dust jacket, full color. It's great what they offer, but it's like you practically need to spend a week just reading the manuals and understanding the website, because it's complicated. So it's something that I think as we go along, we can create more resources around that. And it's really interesting to have your feedback, because I think that, as you said, for a niche topic like this, and if you have your audience, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I went with Amazon because Amazon also, you can talk to somebody, whereas Lulu, you can't talk to anybody. It's just all some digital universe that you have to go through. And also because you have automatic marketing. I mean, it's on. People know where to get it. The other disadvantage of this print on demand is really retail. It's hard for retailers to get the book. They don't offer discounts, retailer discounts. So I get people coming to me saying, "Can you use your author's discount?" And sometimes I do this, but it's a pain in the neck. But there is, like, Ingram's actually handles the wholesale aspect, but they're expensive, but they're more professional than Amazon themselves. Like, if I order books from Amazon, sometimes they come damaged because they don't pack them well and so on. But Ingram's, they charge more, but they, and like Ibrahim Tahir in Singapore, he used to ask me to send him books, and then he said he said that too many were damaged by Amazon, so Ingram's packs them better and so on.
That's very good to know. That's very good to know, because coming selected poems by Daniel Abdulhamid, which we're still working on, that's going to be coming out through Ingram. So alhamdulillah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and we'll discuss all of these details in another session.
Well, and tell me how that's working out with them. I'd be interested. We all need to share that. Exactly. I want to also just commend you on putting this salon together. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and anything I can do to support it, that's, I'm delighted.
Alhamdulillah, you're already supporting by sharing your nuggets of wisdom and a lifetime of writer's experience, which is what all of us, inshallah, look forward to having. If that's the way that Allah wants it for us. But I wanted to thank you so much for giving your time, and apologies for our late start, and thank you all of you for being here and your thought-provoking, interesting, challenging questions. This is what this is all about. This is how we get to the heart of it all, and we can support each other by sharing this information, as you say. And mashallah, to write as a means of sharing and serving towards other people, which is what else can we do. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate all of you guys so much. Thank you so much. And tabarakallah, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And then next time I'll interview you.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.